The man in the red tie was waiting on my doorstep when I got back from my shift at the warehouse. My last shift at the warehouse, to be precise. Without warning, my entire crew had been laid off. I had driven home in a numb haze, half thrilled that I might never see that soul-sucking place again, and half terrified about how I was going to pay next month's rent. I was so distracted that I almost walked right over top of the guy. "Benjamin Alexander Hearn?" he asked officiously. I told him that just Ben was fine. Nobody had called me Benjamin since high school detention. "My name is Osgood Mosby, of Mosby and Sons Solicitors." The man in the red tie went on. "I have an important message for you regarding the final testament of Jennifer Price. May we speak inside?" Jennifer Price? I hadn't thought about my mother in years. Apart from the photos that my father had shown me when I was a child, I had never actually seen her. And that was fine with me. As far as I was concerned, my father was my only real family. Jennifer Price was just some woman who had brought me into the world and then left me to fend for myself. To his credit, my father never blamed her for walking out on us. When I asked why she left, he would only shrug and say, "Oh, I'm sure she had her reasons." After a long day of work, he barely had the energy to heat up dinner and play with me for an hour or two before collapsing into bed. And as I got older, I came to understand that the questions that I was asking only caused him pain. If he was keeping any of my mother's secrets, he took them with him to the grave. I stared down at the manila envelope in the little bald lawyer's hands, wondering what it could possibly contain. An apology letter, the rights to some mostly empty bank accounts and a mountain of debt. It wasn't until I sat down across from Osgood Mosley that I realized what his visit really meant. My mother, my last living relative, had passed on. It was a lonely, hollow feeling, and I hadn't expected it to hit quite so hard. "Firstly, Benjamin, let me say that I'm sorry for your loss," Osgood Mosby began. "All these visits are never easy, but we've been entrusted with the execution of your mother's will." The lawyer paused. Something about the situation rubbed him the wrong way, but I couldn't tell what. "As you'll see here," he continued, "her assets are entirely tied up in Weeping Tree books. Taking ownership of the store is therefore practically a requirement to inherit." I blinked. My mother had owned a bookstore. Stranger still was the address. It was less than a 15-minute drive away. I had always imagined my mother living with some swanky New York art dealer or belly dancing on some hippie commune out west, but apparently she had never left my hometown. Why had she never reached out to us? Part of me wanted to rip the packet and throw it in the trash, but another part was grimly curious to know what had made this bookstore so much more important than her own flesh and blood. Looking through the numbers gave me another reason to hesitate. While Weeping Tree Books wasn't going to make me rich by any means, it would be better than scrounging around for another warehouse job. Osgood waited patiently while I read, and then we signed some papers and he told me that he would be in touch. Something jangled in the bottom of the folder. "The bookstore keys," Osgood explained. "Ordinarily, I wouldn't leave them with you until everything is finalized, but this is hardly an ordinary situation. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon." With that, the lawyer stood, adjusted his tie, and left. As soon as I was sure that he was gone, I bolted to my car and sped across town to a place that I had never heard of. A little shop called Weeping Tree Books. The place wasn't easy to find. It was located in a maze of courtyard shops set back from the nearest street. If I hadn't been looking for it, I don't know how I would have even known that it was there. The other stores included an accounting firm, a nail salon, and a hole-in-the-wall Chinese restaurant. None of them seemed very busy, but I could see right away how the shop had gotten its name. There was a tall, gnarled willow tree in the center of the courtyard. I pressed my face against the window of the bookstore, but I couldn't make out anything in the dusty gloom. It felt like I was being watched, but the only living thing nearby was the enormous tree at my back. With a shiver, I turned the key in the lock. A dusty bell clanged over my head as I stepped inside. I don't know what I was expecting. With its yellowed ceiling and ugly gray and green carpet, the place felt like a gigantic filing cabinet. Narrow aisles took a surreptitious route toward the back of the store, which from where I was standing, I couldn't even see. Behind the display shelves was a wooden counter, an old-fashioned cash register, and a door labeled "Staff." My throat tightened. I felt my heartbeat accelerate. If my mother had left anything behind, that's where it would be. I was heading toward it when I heard a loud thump from the nearest aisle. A book had fallen from a shelf. It was so large and heavy that I couldn't imagine how it could have happened, unless it had been pushed. "Hello?" I called out. Of course, nobody answered. With the hair on the back of my neck standing up, I continued toward the staff room door. I found the key, pushed open it, and gasped. The room on the other side was a mini apartment, complete with a twin-sized bed, a miniature bathroom, and overhead storage. It reminded me of photos that I had seen of living quarters on submarines, rugged and almost cozy, in a claustrophobic sort of way. The bed was unmade, as though somebody, maybe even my mother, had been sleeping in it recently. A woman's clothes were in the cabinets, and there were other signs of life as well. Clothes, perfume, toothpaste. A tiny wrinkled photo was stuck in the corner of the mirror. It was a picture of a baby. Of me. The strangest thing was the total absence of technology. There was no laptop or alarm clock, not even a phone charger. I pulled my own phone from my pocket and discovered uneasily that, even though we were in the middle of town, I didn't have any service. The dusty bell above the main door clanged. A customer. Now I was going to have to explain to them who I was, what I was doing there, and why the shop was in fact still closed. I took a deep breath and turned around.
"You're not Jenny."
The wispy voice came from a young girl in an old-fashioned dress. The evening sun at her back made it impossible to see her face, but her irritation was clear and a little frightening. It felt like I was being accused of something. Miss Price isn't available right now. We're actually not even open for business, so..."
"Jenny said my order would be here. She promised."
The girl took a step toward me and extracted something from the apron of her dress. Something bladed and razor sharp that glinted in the dying rays of sunlight. She had a knife.
"I want my order,"
the girl repeated, shaking with anger. I was about to yell something about how I would call the police if she didn't leave, but my cell wasn't working, and even the fragile-looking child in front of me could do a lot of damage to me or herself with that sharp edge before they got here. I put on my dumbest customer service face and asked if she knew where Jenny usually kept the orders.
"Beneath the counter, right there."
She pointed, as though I might be too stupid to see it. I bent down and found a shelf labeled "Reserved." There was only one book on it, a secondhand copy of some teen slasher novel from the 90s. I stood to hand it to her, only to discover that she was standing behind me.
"It's a good thing you had this,"
she whispered, as she slipped the book out of my hand. I shook my head. She was obviously going to tell me whether I wanted to hear it or not.
"I wouldn't have hurt you. No, nothing that easy. I would have just started to scream. And then, when somebody came running, I would have taken your hand, like this."
She gripped my wrist. Her fingers were small, cold, and hideously strong.
"And then I would have plunged this big old knife right into my throat."
The girl smiled up at me.
"Do you know what they do to child murderers in prison?"
Before I could answer, she slipped the massive blade back into the pocket of her apron, picked up the book, and left the store.
When you see Jenny in hell, tell her that Esme says hi.
The girl shouted, and then let the door slam behind her. I waited a beat and then ran to alert the authorities. Or at least I tried to. Something odd happened when I reached the display shelves. The floor beneath my feet seemed to stretch somehow. No matter how hard I sprinted, I just couldn't advance. It was maddening and dizzying. I grabbed my knees woozily and then tried to jump forward instead. Nothing. I got the same result from walking backwards, climbing onto the display case or slithering across the carpet with my eyes shut. I wasn't sure which possibility was more horrifying, that I had lost my mind and all of this was in my head, or that I had somehow become a prisoner of Weeping Tree books. I was running out of things to try and it was getting dark. Another book had tumbled from the shelf, but I wasn't going to investigate. Not with the bookstore already so gloomy that I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I had an awful feeling that if I started down one of those aisles, I would turn around to find that the shelves had rearranged themselves and the way back to daylight had been closed off to me forever. With a tense look over my shoulder, I made my way to the door marked staff. I closed it behind me and I lay down in the darkness to wait for morning. I dreamed of black, hairy hands holding me down and cracking open my chest as though it were a book. They peeled away my skin layer by layer, as though each one were a separate page. No matter how much it hurt, however, I just didn't have the strength to escape. My eyes snapped open. I had gotten tangled in the bedsheets. The stuffy little room was still pitch black, but more than just the nightmare had jolted me awake. Something was turning the handle of the door. Blinding light flooded into the room. I threw my hands up in front of my face and screamed. "Oh, forgive the intrusion," Osgood Mosley said and adjusted his tie. "Oh, when I didn't find you at home, I suspected where you might have gone. I suppose you've noticed that you're unable to leave." I thought back to the night before, to the ugly carpet extending beneath my feet, like some sort of horrible gray and green ocean. The memory made my empty stomach roll. I groaned and asked Osgood what the hell he was talking about. "Oh, you're the bookkeeper now. The store will not permit you to exit. Right now I suppose you're imagining yourself tunneling under the floor or breaking out through the ceiling. But whatever you're thinking, I assure you that another bookkeeper's already tried it and failed. The sooner you accept your fate, the better it will be for everyone involved." I didn't want to believe him, but his words carried the weight of a judge's life sentence. If what he was saying was true, all I had left in the world was what I had walked in with. My wallet and keys, a cell phone that didn't work, and the lighter that I still carried, even though I had quit smoking years ago. I clenched my hands into fists and demanded to know how he could have put me in this situation. Wasn't he supposed to be my mother's attorney? "Oh, I never said Jennifer Price was our client," Osgood huffed, sounding hurt. "I said that we've been charged with the execution of her will. In this case, we work at the behest of the Weeping Tree Books Trust Fund. We have a contract with the Chinese restaurant across the plaza. They'll provide you with 3 meals per day and whatever toiletries you need. If there are any other issues, you can inform me when I come by to empty the till each Friday." I fired off one angry question after another, but Osgood just held up his hand. "Oh, I'm really not at liberty to say anything more, although I do suggest that you avoid damaging or angering the store in any way. If you do," the lawyer chuckled, "the expanding carpet will be the least of your worries." I've never been a violent person. Even when things didn't go my way, I was usually able to keep my temper in check. But something about the smirk on that smug lawyer's face made me see red. As I lunged at him, he backed away until he had passed the display case. No matter how hard I swung my fist now, it wouldn't be enough to get at him. The dictionary that I chucked at his head fell at my feet as though I had simply dropped it. "Good luck, Benjamin." Osgood Mosley sighed and then walked out of the door. It was only after he was gone that I noticed the takeout bag on the counter. I had never eaten lukewarm kung pao chicken for breakfast before, but my hunger made it delicious. There was something comforting about the familiarity of the food. It reminded me that no matter how surreal my situation had become, I was still alive and kicking. I had shelter, sustenance, and my faculties intact. I didn't have to go down without a fight. The first order of business was to find the circuit breaker. It turned out to be right behind the door of the staff room. I could have even found it the night before if the shop hadn't been so dim. With the lights finally on, it was time to explore my new prison. By the time that I got to the end of the first aisle, I realized that little wasn't a word that could be applied here. The space was low-ceilinged and narrow, but another room full of shelves expanded to my right and to my left. A steep set of wooden stairs led to still more floors. The rational side of my mind knew that what I was seeing was impossible. There should have been apartments directly above and other stores on either side. But physics didn't seem to matter much inside of Weeping Tree Books. My foot banged against something as I walked. It was the book that had fallen from the shelf the night before. I picked it up and began to read. Benjamin Alexander Hearn didn't know what the little blue book contained, but seeing his own name in it made his stomach queasy. His eyes darted obsessively over the page, completely oblivious to the burning man standing behind him, eager to wrap his charred, bony fingers around his neck. I gasped and looked over my shoulder. The aisle was empty, but I could have sworn that I smelled charcoal in the air. When I glanced back down at the book, its pages were blank. Maybe, I thought queasily, they always had been. The bell above the door clanged, and I was grateful for an excuse to hurry back to the counter. The freckly, curly-haired guy in the doorway fiddled uneasily with the device in his hand while he waited. "Sign for this," he grunted, nudging the cardboard box in front of him with the toe of his boot. When I asked what was inside, he just shrugged. "Hey, don't ask me, man, I just deliver the packages." He squinted hard at me. "Hey, you're new, huh? The lady before was a lot nicer. She always had a pot of tea ready when I stopped by. I technically wasn't supposed to have any because I was on the clock and all, but..." He shrugged again. "She used to say that I reminded her of her son. And do you know what happened to her?" I felt the blood rush from my face. This was too much to handle all at once. I signed for the package, apologized for not having any drinks to offer, and I told him that I would see him next time. "I hope so," he said ominously, and then shouldered back out through the door. Almost reluctantly, I retrieved some scissors from below the counter and opened the box. It contained about 24 secondhand books. 2 were marked as special orders. I thought of Esme and her knife and shivered. The rest bore a note in some weird foreign language. As I looked away from the words, however, they seemed to come into focus. It was as though I could only read them from the corner of my eye. The message they carried was even stranger. "Stock before nightfall," it read. It appeared that I would be exploring the rest of the store sooner than I thought. I loaded the books onto the hand cart beside the staff room and headed into the depths of the bookstore, making sure to take a different aisle than I had the first time. It was that quick decision, seemingly unimportant at the time, which ultimately saved my life. As I walked, I became aware of a thin red wire running along the floor. It bent and twisted with the bookshelves, turning at random, and I found myself following it. Since I didn't know where I was going, it didn't matter which route I took. What mattered was being able to find my way back. At first, I thought that Weeping Tree was laid out like a normal bookstore. There were sections for romance, science fiction, history. There was even a kids section. The further I went, however, the more obvious it became that my impression had been wrong. The signs above the aisles, nooks, and reading areas became more bizarre. Cryptozoology, non-Euclidean geometry, alternate futures. Some of the labels were in other languages, pictures, and hieroglyphics. I wished I could stop and browse through some of them, but I was too busy looking for a section where the delivery books might fit. They all seemed to be old biographies of saints, although not from any religion that I had ever heard of. Sweat ran down my back, my hands were numb from hauling the handcart, and the lights overhead had started to feel like the sun of some sweltering desert. Most disturbing of all, I was no longer sure exactly how long I had been walking. It felt like hours, but it could have been more. The only thing that I was certain of was the red cable I was following along the floor. At some point, I heard a bang from inside the box. I hadn't hit any bumps, yet a book called The Agony of Saint Honora had toppled over. As I put it back in place, it shuddered eagerly in my hand. Stocked before nightfall, the note had said. I wondered what time it was. I picked up my pace, barely pausing to inspect the signs above the sections that I passed. Aruspicy, eschatology. I sniffled. That weird, charred smell was back. There was a sort of haze in the air too, as though the shelves were filling with smoke. The Burning Man. The thought crossed my mind seconds before I saw him, a black shade wreathed in fire. Although the flames around him burned white hot, the carpet beneath his feet wasn't even singed, as though this was a special fire meant only for him. A low groaning sound came from his ribcage. It was a noise that bones might make if they could scream. The Burning Man's back was to me, and I prayed that the wheels of the handcart wouldn't squeak as I snuck past his aisle. I rounded a corner and felt the air clear. I had made it, this time. Another angry bang came from inside of the box, reminding me of what I was doing in the depths of the bookstore. A few minutes later, I finally found a section that I thought might fit. Esoteric hagiography. Wasn't that the study of saints? Better yet, the shelves were only about 2/3 full. There was more than enough room to do what I needed to and get back to the front desk before what? The cover of The Agony of Saint Honora lifted slightly, as though something was bashing against it from below. A wail came from within, one that reminded me of a woman crying in pain. I scrambled to cram it onto the shelf, and as I slid it into place, I felt someone's cold fingers slip out from between the pages and brush against my own. With a sinking feeling in my gut, I turned back to the box. A large tome bound in what I hoped was leather had flung itself free and it was rattling on the floor. Inside of a small white lace booklet, a chant was growing louder and louder. There were other warning signs too, but none of them seemed nearly as urgent as that unholy chorus. It sounded like it was coming from inside of my own skull, and it didn't stop until I put it into place on the shelf. And behind me, the skin-bound tome flipped open. A raw-headed, crimson thing rose out of it, as though climbing from a well. The blood-soaked monk's robes that it wore left no stain on the pages, but when its empty eye sockets met mine, I knew that it was no hallucination. "Sinner," it hissed, pointing a skinless finger directly at me. Other books were struggling to open themselves as well, but there was no time for that now. I had to get away while I still could. I glanced over my shoulder and was horrified to see that where there had been an open aisle behind me, there was now only a sealed wall of bookcases. The flayed monk got down on all fours like an animal, twisted his head around backwards, and skittered towards me. I dived out of the way and crawled frantically toward the book that he had come from. As he charged for a second time, I slammed it shut and watched him disappear into thin air. As I slammed his book into place on the shelf, I read its title, The Flaying of Saint Valak. I shelved the rest of the books, beginning with the most active ones, and by the time that it was done, I was panting from the effort. Who the hell would buy one of these awful things? I wondered, and what might they use it for? The clang of the shop's bell reminded me that I would probably find out soon enough. It also reminded me that I was lost in the depths of the store, so lost that it seemed strange to me that I could hear the bell at all. And then I remembered the red cable. It was there all right, even if it wasn't where I had remembered. The path back to the entrance led through an entirely different set of shelves, and along the way, I saw something that chilled me to the core. At the end of one of the aisles, a man hung by a belt from the rafters. He was skeletally thin and pale. It seemed that the rope had just finished what starvation had already begun. The flesh on his fingers had been chewed off, and although I couldn't have said for sure, it seemed like he had done it himself. The second, I took a step toward the poor man's cadaver, and then I realized what recovering it would mean. I would have to leave the safe zone marked by the red cable and cross 4 more corridors. When I turned back around, would I find only another wall of bookcases? Would I wind up wandering helplessly for weeks or even longer, literally eating myself just to keep the hunger at bay? I turned away from the grisly sight and hurried toward the front desk. Even though it felt like I had walked for hours to reach this section, I arrived at the front of the store in less than 2 minutes. The man at the counter cleared his throat. I looked him over nervously. Goatee, piercings, long-length black trench coat. I asked how I could help him. "I need a cookbook," he whispered. When he saw the look on my face, he blushed and added, "My girlfriend says if I don't start pulling my weight around the house, she's gonna kick me out. I'm fine with anything so long as the recipes are easy." It occurred to me that even a shop like this from time to time would be visited by regular folks. I was about to warn him to be careful not to get lost, but the store behind me seemed to have shrunk somehow. The oddly named sections had vanished, and the culinary nook was plain to see. I pointed to it and watched him shuffle away sheepishly. A few minutes later, the bell clanged again. A stocky gray-haired woman in a puffy pink sweater walked through the door. Unlike the young man in the cooking section, she didn't say hello or acknowledge me at all. She just stared from behind her thick, tortoiseshell glasses. Her glare continued even as she waddled past the front desk. Her neck twisted in a way that shouldn't have been possible, not even for a contortionist. I gulped. This was no ordinary customer. Trying to act casual, I slipped out from behind the desk and I walked into the stacks, pretending to be searching for something. As soon as I was out of the woman's line of sight, I planned to tell the young guy in the trench coat something. I still wasn't sure what, to get him out of harm's way. I was rounding the corner of the second set of bookcases when the woman walked out in front of me. She was breathing excitedly through her mouth, which suddenly seemed much wider than it had been a moment ago. Her head moved toward me even though her body hadn't budged. She ran her tongue over wormy violet lips. On the other side, I could see several rows of tiny razor-sharp teeth. Even without words, I understood her warning. Stay put. Don't interfere. As I backed away, I whistled, coughed, and even knocked over a display stand. but none of it was enough to make the young man turn around. I didn't see what happened next, but I heard it. The gasp, the scream choked in blood, the gruesome sound of feasting. The noise reminded me of a pack of hyenas ripping apart a corpse. I stayed frozen behind the front desk until the woman passed by for a second time. Beneath her fluffy pink sweater, her stomach was hideously distended, as though she had just eaten something even larger than she was. She bought a pair of romance novels and a thick purple encyclopedia called Mind-Altering Toxins of the Great Lakes Region. There was still a few flecks of red on her cheeks. I glanced back down the aisles behind her. They extended into the distant darkness once again. The store, it seemed, could rearrange itself based on the customers inside of it. I wondered what else it was capable of. Was it sentient? Or was it just reacting to the stimulus around it, the way that plants in shade incline toward the sunlight? Did my mother also have to learn all of this the hard way, back when she was the bookkeeper? My experiences so far left one thing crystal clear. The store couldn't or wouldn't protect me. I was disposable, just like my mother, the hanging man, and all the other bookkeepers before us. The pork fried rice and oolong teas sitting on the counter had gone cold, but I wolfed them down anyway. As I ate, I thought about the red cable. Someone had found a safe path through the store and put it there, which meant that the previous bookkeepers might have other information to pass down. Information which could help me stay alive inside of this nightmare. The idea hit me with the force of a religious revelation. I shoved aside my food and started turning the staff room upside down. I checked beneath drawers, in the pages of magazines, behind the toilet and inside the lampshade, but I found nothing. And then I looked at the mirror, at my own baby picture still tucked snugly in the corner. If my mother had left anything else important behind, it might be connected to the mirror as well. I lifted it gently from the wall. A thin red journal was taped to the back of it. The first page was blank. The second began with a chilling greeting. "Hello, stranger. My name is Eugene Dodd," it began. "And if you're reading this, then I'm already dead. I know I can't make you believe any of what I've written because for all you know, this journal is just another one of the bookstore's little tricks. Not sure what I mean? You must be new here. Until this place caught me on the night of December 17th, 1948. I was a club drummer with a 2-pack habit and a criminal record for theft, which kept me from getting a straight job. I used to walk past Weeping Tree Books every morning on my way back from gigs, and there was always this pretty brunette sitting on a stool behind the front desk. One morning when I was still drunk from the night before, I decided that I ought to go inside and talk to her. We hit it off right away, and pretty soon we were sharing coffee, donuts, and kisses behind the counter every morning. She was lonely, she said. She had an abuser in her life, one who wouldn't let her go, and she wanted my help. She asked me to bring her a pistol so that she could finally be free. By that point, I would have done anything to help her, so I reached out to some of my contacts and got her what she wanted. You should have seen the smile on her face when I walked in the door that snowy December morning, opened up my coat and showed her the .38. She ran up to me, kissed me deep, and took it out of my hand. Then she told me she was sorry and she used it on herself. I was in shock. Even though there was no way anybody could survive a wound like that, I still tried to go find help, but I couldn't get any closer to the door. When I turned around again, the store had absorbed all that was left of the girl I loved. Even the bullet hole in the wall had disappeared like it was never there. At noon, a guy from the deli around the corner dropped off some sandwiches, collected the trash, and left without a word. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Here's what I've learned in the past few months. Maybe it'll be useful to you. Then again, maybe not. Weeping Tree Books has been around since 1862 at least, but its history probably goes back a lot further than that. I only know that date because of a rolled up newspaper in the pocket of a skeleton that I found. The dead man's clothes were right for the time period, and while I don't know what killed him, something took the time to pluck the teeth out of his skull. The store moves around a lot. I found junk in here from Baton Rouge, London, Hong Kong, and Montreal, just to name a few. Somebody in power is aware of the place's existence, because every now and again 2 government types in black suits come by to scope it out. They never come inside though. They probably know better. Which brings me to the customers. You'll get some average folks here and there, but the majority come to Weeping Tree Books because what's available here can't be found anywhere else. Some of them won't notice your presence at all, and most will ignore you out of respect for the bookstore. And then there are the others. The ones who will want to drink your blood or lay their eggs in your throat. The ones who will want to dissect your thoughts and feed on your fear. For them, you're just a special treat on the way to whatever twisted knowledge they came here to find. I've been lucky so far, but that's the thing about luck, right? Sooner or later, it always runs out. I've been here for over 13 years now, and I can feel myself starting to slow down. I may not be able to get out of this place, but maybe I can take it to hell with me. I asked Mickey over at the deli to bring me a couple of gas cans and a box of matches. All I need now is a spark. And so, stranger, I guess this is goodbye. Maybe these words will go up in smoke along with the rest of this god-awful place. But if they don't and you stumble on this little journal a couple of decades down the line, don't say I didn't warn you. That was the end of Eugene's handwriting. I thought I finally had an idea about who the Burning Man might have been. Another bookkeeper had picked up where he had left off, and another after that, but there was no time to flip through them now. The dusty bell above the door was ringing. And so it went. There were days when I had no customers, and there were days when the demands of being the bookkeeper left me aching and exhausted. For every ordinary customer, there were a dozen who were more or less than entirely human. Their requests sent me scurrying to the depths of the bookstore, places where the shelves stretched too high to see or where the stairs spiraled down into a cold, damp darkness that seemed to have no bottom. I got to know John, the long-haired teenager who had brought me my meals from the restaurant across the square. He seemed to understand my situation and offered to cook my meals rather than just bringing me leftovers. After trying his attempts at French toast and spaghetti, however, I decided to stick to the menu. In my free time, I read everything that I could get my hands on, but especially the journal that I had discovered behind the mirror. Within its pages, I found a list of the most dangerous customers, along with their physical descriptions and suggestions for how to survive their visits. The squat gray-haired woman made an appearance beside the line. Let her do as she pleases if you want to live. Next came the notes of a bookkeeper named Anna, who had marked the safest route through the store with a red cable. Apparently, she had also set up a blue cable that ran vertically, and a yellow one whose purpose I couldn't guess. Anna's section of the journal ended abruptly with the phrase, "Tomorrow I'll take my stable gun and follow the yellow line all the way to..." The pages beyond had all been ripped out. I had hoped to find something written by my mother among the other bookkeeper's scribblings, but there was no such luck. I checked the back of the baby picture pressed into the corner of the mirror, but there I found only a single mysterious phrase. I've hidden it in the puzzle book section. No matter what happens, Pigface can't be allowed to have it. I had never seen any sort of puzzle section in the bookstore, and I had no idea who Pigface was. but whatever my mother had written was so important to her that she had used the entire back of the photograph to send her message. And then during my second week at Weeping Tree Books, a customer arrived who would change my life forever. He came in an hour after lunch, and as he walked through the doorway, he smothered the sound of the bell with an enormous hand. Despite his immense size, he moved silently. If I hadn't happened to look toward the front of the store in that precise moment, he could have easily snuck up behind me. He had the kind of bulky, overgrown build that I associated with steroids, but his tanned skin and weather-beaten clothes gave him the appearance of someone who lived on the streets. Weirdest of all was his mask, a pink rubber pig's head that stuck out from beneath his hood. Pig face, I thought, and shuddered. "I'm looking for some stolen property," the huge man rumbled. "It's in here somewhere. I can smell it." When I asked him what title he was searching for, he chuckled. It was like a mountain laughing. "There isn't any title, but I'll know it when I see it." I started to tell him that he was free to browse for as long as he liked, but that only got another rumbling giggle. "Oh no," Pigface insisted. "You're coming with me." He put a hand on my shoulder and pinched. It felt like my arm was about to pop out of its socket. I clenched my teeth to avoid crying out, but it was clear that running away wasn't an option. Pigface, half guided, half pushed me forward into the stacks. I noticed nervously that we weren't taking the safe route, but before I could mention it, we had made another turn and the red cable had disappeared completely. I wondered aloud whether the big man knew what section his stolen property might be in. "Just keep walking," he grunted and nudged me toward a downward spiraling staircase that I had never seen before. The list of dangerous customers in the journal hadn't mentioned anyone who looked like this, but that didn't mean much. Whoever had compiled it had only been the bookkeeper for a few months, and the note about Pigface came afterwards. Each sub-basement we passed was disorientingly similar to the first floor. I kept an eye out for Anna's blue cable, but there was no sign of it. Whoever the big stranger was, he seemed to know exactly what he wanted and where he was going. "There," Pigface rumbled, pointing to the top shelf of a section marked puzzle books. I was so unnerved by how deep we had gone, and by the fact that I couldn't find my way back, that it took me a moment to react. Pigface gestured irritably to the ladder beside the shelf. I figured he was too heavy to climb up it himself. As reluctant as I was to turn my back on him, I put my boot on the base of the ladder and went to retrieve his stolen property. The top shelf was higher than it had looked from below, and the stranger's large size distorted the dizzying view downward. The ladder wobbled uneasily as I grabbed the book that Pigface was pointing to. It was a beautifully embossed volume that looked like it could have been a collection of fairy tales, and I couldn't resist taking a quick peek inside. I pretended to lose my balance and let the book fall open on the rung in front of me. The page I had flipped to showed a photo of some kind of stone pit, one that had been sealed with rusty bars. It looked real enough to touch. And then a pair of hands reached up from the darkness inside. A young boy pressed his face against the bars, mouthing the word "help." I gasped and turned the page, only to find another pit holding another child. I thought of all the stories I had heard about witches and ogres with big burlap bags who came to drag away the bad kids. If there was any truth to them, it wasn't a stretch to imagine that such a creature might be storing his victims inside of an enchanted book. The ladder trembled. Pigface had grabbed it, and now he was jabbing his finger up at me, ordering me to throw him the book right now. I shook my head and told him that I would be down in a minute. Pigface kicked the ladder. I hugged the rungs with one hand and clutched the book against my chest with the other. It was my only bargaining chip. Once the big man got it, he could do whatever he wanted with me. If I was lucky, I might end up in one of those cells between those beautifully etched pages. I threw myself against the nearest shelf. Its ledge was barely wide enough to support my sweaty fingers. "There's nowhere to run. If you come down now, I promise that I'll make it quick." I looked left, right, and then at the perilous drop below. Pigface was right, but I wasn't going to admit it. I scooted along the ledge while he followed down below, waiting for me to give in to the inevitable. He was too big to climb up after me, but I figured it was only a matter of time before he decided to knock over whatever shelf I was clinging to. And what would happen then? I scrambled diagonally and down, making sure to stay beyond the reach of these strangers' freakishly long arms. My eyes started up to the single incandescent light bulb illuminating this particular nook of the bookstore, and it gave me an idea. I flung the first hardcover I grabbed at the bulb, and when it shattered, I leapt to the floor in darkness. A shower of other books tumbled down behind me, but I didn't hear any sounds of pursuit as I crawled around the corner and got to my feet. I couldn't even hear the big man's breathing. Where had he gone? A hand clamped down on my face. "Bet you didn't know that I can see in the dark." Pigface tightened his grip on my face a little, but the pressure was enough to make me scream. His free hand closed around his property and all of the captives within. I sniffed. Shortly after the bulb had shattered, I had become aware of a faint smoky smell wafting through the aisles. I spotted a faint orange flicker. The burning man. "Eugene!" I shouted. "Help!" Through a gap in the books, I saw the fiery corpse pause. And then everything seemed to happen at once. Eugene's flame-wreathed spirit careened toward us, crashing into Pigface like a fireball. He let go of me and tumbled backward, howling with rage and pain. I ran without looking back. I could hear the shelves reorganizing themselves, trapping the big man in its depths. The store wasn't protecting me, I realized. It was punishing Pigface for his disrespect. I spotted a staircase to my right, but I didn't dare to take it, not without knowing where I was first. The sounds of Pigface's struggling grew fainter. I slowed down and concentrated my energy on searching for the blue cable, the one that Anna claimed she had used to navigate between levels of the bookstore. 4 staircases later, and I finally found it. I followed it to its meeting point with the red cable, and then back to the front desk of Weeping Tree Books. I slammed the big man's volume onto the counter and opened it, this time from the beginning. That charred smell made me look up before I had even begun. Eugene stood at the far end of the aisle holding something in his hand. He flung it toward me and then walked back into the stacks, leaving behind only a smoky haze and a flickering orange glow. After he had gone, I approached and retrieved it. It was a key. Its tip was black as though dyed by ink, and the sight gave me a mad, impossible idea. And then again, these photos of caged pits, these children trapped between the pages of a book. Wasn't that just as crazy? Maybe an insane problem demanded an insane solution. Working fast, I flipped to the first picture that showed one of those awful prisons. A padlock was clearly visible beside the bars. I lowered the key toward it and felt it sink into the page. I twisted it in the lock and then did the same for each cage on the following pages. I was rewarded by the sight of scampering feet and grinning faces. The children were finally breaking free. At any moment, I expected to see Pigface emerge from the depths of the store, covered with hideous burn wounds and roaring for vengeance, but the bookshop stayed silent. It had swallowed him, just like it had swallowed so many others. I knew that I might never learn the truth about how my mother was ensnared by Weeping Tree Books, or what happened to her afterwards. But after so many years of bitterness, I finally felt at peace with her memory. I had fulfilled her last request, one that she had entrusted me to find in spite of the nightmarish circumstances. In a few hours, John will come by with some egg rolls and shrimp fried rice. I'll read a few more chapters of The Long Goodbye, and then crawl into bed before it gets dark. I've learned the hard way not to wander around the store at night. Tomorrow, I'll begin my search for Anna's yellow cable and the missing pages of Eugene's journal. There's no guarantee that it will lead to an escape from Weeping Tree Books, but I've got all the time in the world to find out. Rain, Nelson Asada, Meek Gasher, That One Woodsman, Sonic GMD, Mina Len Kidder, SWAT, Tino, Wayward Son, Big Country Allen, Jimmy, Caleb Windsor, MP Massacre, Jacob Bartlett, Miss Eldridge, Casey Long, Michelle Ali, Lone Wolf Sam, Damon McCory, Abe D. Lovey, J.A., Justin Fotenauer, Thurston Herrera, Kathy McGuire, D.H., Leon Knott, Z-Toke7, Unfazed, Shrimpo the Fourth Shrimp, Susan Korn,